Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Governor-elect Jerry Brown warns California educators to be prepared for cuts in their budget proposal. A controversial cap-and-trade program is the final step in implementing the state's landmark greenhouse gas-reducing AB 32. Will the new plan to bring the America's Cup sailing competition to San Francisco be enough to lure it in? And the largest Latino-owned winery in the nation is right here in the Napa-Sonoma area. Recently, it joined forces with one of the few African-American-owned wineries. Those stories are coming up next. Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Joining me tonight on our news panel are Rachel Gordon, City Hall reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle; Craig Miller, senior editor of KQED's Climate Watch; and Jill Tucker, education writer also with the Chronicle; and John Myers, Sacramento bureau chief for KQED Public Radio, joining us from Sacramento. John, we're going to start with you. Tell us, please, how will Governor-elect Jerry Brown solve this $28 billion budget shortfall?
Boy, Belva, I wish I had the answer for that. I tell you, Sacramento is one of those towns that thrives on information. Everybody in the Capitol corridor, they want to know, the gossip, rumor mills. Everybody always wants to know things. Nobody knows what Brown is going to do. No one has any real information. And he doesn't have a lot of time to actually make a decision. As a matter of fact, we probably expect, I would say, right about now, maybe next week, Governor-elect Brown's budget proposal for January actually goes to the printer. So he has to lock in a lot of decisions. It's a $28 billion problem. We thought it was about 25. All of these tax agreements back in Washington, D.C. this week added more to the state's deficit because of a change in the estate tax laws. $28 billion over 18 months. What does Brown do? He's had two public events now, one here in Sacramento, one in L.A. The L.A. one focused a little bit on education funding. It's going to be tough all around. Brown told people, when you read the stories, when I put out the budget on January 10th, sit down, or if you're in your car, buckle up. It's going to be a tight ride. And I think that is very true. No one expects this to be anything but a very, very, very serious and drastically spending cut heavy budget.
John, what kind of collaboration, if any, is being done between Brown and the sitting governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger? Are they working together, or is Brown really going to go in a whole different direction? I can't imagine he can do it from scratch this quickly.
Well, interestingly enough, I don't think that Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor-elect Brown have hardly met at all. I think they've actually met in person once during this transition period. The interesting thing about transitions for governors in California is the State Department of Finance is basically full of civil servants. Most of those people start actually working for the governor-elect after the election on his budget, trying to work him through the process. So he's actually got a staff of sorts. But Schwarzenegger is not involved, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, interesting story there, put forward a $10 billion budget solution back a couple of weeks ago that the legislature basically told him thanks, but no thanks, we'll wait for Jerry Brown. And so this is going to be Brown's to solve. But I think what you're going to see out of Brown, this gets back to Belva's first question, I think what you're going to see out of Brown is a very serious budget full of cuts, because he said no taxes without voter approval during the campaign. And I sense that what he's going to do is present the public a budget that says, look, you don't want any taxes. This is what we have to do. These are the kinds of spending cuts that we have to do. Schools, social services, maybe even prisons. If you want that, fine. If you don't want that, let's have a conversation about revenues.
Does that mean a special election or something?
I think a special election is a pretty likely scenario. When Brown during the campaign spoke to the editorial board of the San Francisco Chronicle, of Rachel's newspaper, he laid out a scenario that sounded even then like he had really done the math about how many days he had to get consensus among legislators here in Sacramento, put something on the ballot, what the election timeline is. I would not be surprised to see a special election sometime in the spring of 2011. Of course, remember that we had a special election all about budget proposals back in 2009, and the voters said no. And so I think that has got to be weighing on the Brown camp, and even Democrats in the legislature. If you're going to go back to the voters, how do you convince them differently that you've got to do something else other than cuts or what we've done in the last few years, these gimmicks and all these assumptions that haven't come true?
Jill Tucker?
Yeah, you know, John, what I thought was really interesting with these talks that Brown had this week, especially to the educators, it was, I think, somewhat disappointing because I think they were hoping that he would come in and have promises or at least speak to education with a different voice, that somehow we're going to preserve the schools, we're going to preserve education, and the educators didn't hear that. They heard it's going to get worse. And it was, I think, very disconcerting. I think there's some thought that perhaps he's coming out with this very austere, very severe, very strict budget with the idea that he's going to have to sell the voters and sell people on the idea of a tax increase. But I'll tell you, I think it was very disappointing to the schools because they wanted somebody, and the new governor, to come in and say enough of the cuts to education, because the reality is there is nothing left to cut.
But let me ask you this, Jill and John, with the whole idea of public appetite for taxes now, the economy's not getting much better that we're seeing. There's still a high unemployment rate in California. People say, yeah, we want good schools, but we don't really know if we can afford to pay for them right now. What's the chance of getting this passed?
I think that's the real question. I think Jill put her finger on it about this sense with schools that there's no more else to cut. I mean, she knows as well as anybody. Jill, I know you know about the teacher layoffs and all the dramatic cuts in school districts all across the state. And I do think it's reasonable to believe that Brown is going to focus on education in these impact of what an austere budget would look like. And the reality is there's no way around K through 12 funding when you look at the state budget. It's somewhere between 35 and 40% of the entire general fund. And if you're going to solve a $28 billion problem without revenues, you're going to have to put education on the table. And I think that's what he wants voters to think about.
Well, and I think the thing is, John, that he's going to have, and Rachel, that he's going to have teachers selling a tax measure for him. He's going to have principals selling a tax measure for him, because they're going to be going to the parents and to the community and saying, you want class sizes of 40 kids? We already lost our librarians, we lost our counselors, we lost our nurses. The only place left to go in the education budget is the teachers. They make up about 80% of the budgets, and they are going to have kids selling this any tax initiative out there, because it really has gotten to that point where they're going to, the reality of what they would have to cut. I mean, they've cut busing, they've cut everything else. There's very little left except teachers.
Well, let me just throw this in really quickly. One of the challenges for Brown, if he goes to the ballot, just very quickly, is this notion that special elections draw a different electorate to the polls than do regular elections. It tends to be more conservative, lower turnout, and those are not the people that typically are going to vote for a tax increase. That could be one of the real challenges, is the voters who show up won't want it.
Jill, let me extend that cutting scenario a little bit. One of the things that I thought was kind of startling last year was school districts actually lopping whole weeks off of the school year. Is that a trend that can continue?
Well, they can't cut any more than they already have, so they could extend that where they would be able to do the same thing next year. But they have to commit to a certain number of days. It was 180. It's now 4 or 5 days shorter than that. Not everybody did that, so there's some wiggle room there. But they're losing some of their federal stimulus money. They've done all of the other cuts that they could do in terms of furloughs and cutting back the school year and that type of thing. But this is on top of that. So not only will they have to continue that level of cut, they have to go deeper. So what they're saying is, tell us where to go. I think there was almost some measure of denial this week, almost laughable denial, like there is nothing.
We're at the no chalk stage.
Yeah, there's just nothing left.
I thought we had some legislation that protected some school money. What's happened to that?
Well, Prop 98 guarantees a minimum funding level for schools, but it's based on revenue in the state. And so they get a minimum percentage of the state revenue, But when that revenue has gone down and costs are increasingly going up, everything from health costs to teacher salaries to gas to electricity, the money that's coming in, which is lower, that Prop 98 doesn't protect them.
Do you think we'll start seeing more fights, though, between like the prison guards union and the teachers union, or are we going to cut social service programs or other state parks, close a state park to keep a school open? I mean, is that the next scenario we see? It's limited resources. We got to see really what our priorities are now in the state.
I think we've already seen that, Rachel. I think that in the last few years, I think you've seen a lot of those groups that represent those different interests. Again, as you laid them out, social services, prisons, and really there's not a constituency for that except the guards union, frankly. Schools have been very wary of trying to fight each other. But right, I mean, there's scarce number of dollars on the table. The economy is slowly getting better. I mean, as you referenced, the unemployment numbers out today, 12.4%. We're still stuck at that number. So the economy is not getting better fast enough. The State Department of Finance said today that revenues are about $1 billion ahead of projections. That sounds great, but nobody knows if that's real money. So I think you're going to have a very, very difficult time when the legislature convenes in January and Jerry Brown puts out this budget. And again, I think it's going to be a very austere budget to say, look, $28 billion, this is what you got to do.
Well, I think it's time now to turn to the outgoing governor and his legacy. Leaving the $28 billion might be considered part of that, but Governor Schwarzenegger is known and has a reputation on the environmental issues. And Craig, you can tell us about AB 32, which was the crown in his
well, as a matter
the jewel in his crown.
As a matter of fact, last night, Air Board Chair Mary Nichols said might have been a first. The governor actually showed up at a meeting of the California Air Resources Board to say a few words and plug this cap and trade system, which we now have a set of rules for after last night's meeting for the first time since the passage of the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2006. So it's a result of 2 years of agonizing public hearings and working groups and comment, and they finally have carved out a set of rules which has been adopted by the Air Board.
Now, AB 32 was passed at a time what would be called plenty compared to where we are today. How do you think the rollout of these, the way that it's going to be enacted?
Very gently. It's being phased in over a number of years. In fact, the program doesn't even start until 2012, early 2012. Begins with only the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. You're talking utilities, power plants, oil refineries. And even then, they're initially going to get what they call those carbon allowances for free. And then over a number of years, by 2015, for example, more than half the covered entities in this program will start to have to pay for the privilege of putting greenhouse gases in the air by buying at auction these carbon permits.
Craig, what do you make of the whole debate that we've had over these last several years over the whole notion of cap and trade? I mean, I remember when the legislature and Schwarzenegger were negotiating this law back in 2006, the standoff was whether the law should say market mechanisms shall be used or may be used. And the Democrats won with this may be used. But in the end, Schwarzenegger got what he wanted in a way, didn't he? I mean, he got this market-based kind of system, which is, I mean, I guess is what cap and trade is.
It is, and it'd be the only one of its kind in the country, too. In a sense, the world is watching this, John, because the closest thing we have to it in this country is a small regional system in the Northeast, which only applies to electric utilities, called RGGI for short. This system is going to cover everybody, pretty much, who puts carbon into the atmosphere, and cover something like 80% of the state economy's total emissions. And so, yeah, that will go forward.
So, Craig, eventually, starting in 2012, or maybe a little bit after, we're going to start seeing some money coming in with this, and I believe it's a pretty big number, and I think a lot of people, including maybe, I don't know, 8,000 schools, would like to know where that money is going to go, because I think we're talking billions of dollars, right? And
we don't know yet, yeah, and the estimates I've seen is maybe $7 billion a year could come in for them, maybe double that. We're not sure. It depends on a lot of different variables, and we don't know yet how that money's going to be spent. The Air Board doesn't have authority over that aspect of it. That's going to get punted back to the lawmakers to decide. But interestingly enough, in a recent poll, when they asked people how to spend that money. A lot of them said, for God's sake, balance the state budget with it. Interestingly enough, though, when you talk to people really involved in this kind of policy, they think a better idea is to use it for things that would advance the purposes of AB 32. You know, like give you knock a little bit off your utility bill.
I'm just saying, no, we're seeing that like with the congestion pricing thing, toll congestions in San Francisco, to use that money to do things to build better transit systems, to give people make it easier to walk and to bike, to try to get people to get out of their cars, which is a big emitter. And I would think perhaps they'd want to use the money for the same things to really clean the air and the environment.
There is a concern that this will, I mean, this is going to cost us something. Obviously, if you're a company and you now have to pay a fee that you didn't have to pay before for putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you're probably going to pass at least part of that along to your customers. And so there's concern there'll be some upward price pressure for things like fuel, electricity, and other commodities as well in the state. And so the thinking right now is let's try to offset some of that for consumers. Like I said, knock a little bit, give you a rebate against your utility bill in case electricity rates go up, or give you an incentive to go out and buy a more energy efficient appliances, or maybe just a tax break.
Is the spirit still there for a clean environment the way it was when Arnold Schwarzenegger really adopted this as his legacy item?
Amazingly, in this state, yes. All the polling shows still strong support for AB 32, support for cap and trade. The rest of the country does not mirror that, you know, and part of this deal is that several states are supposed to join California in something called the Western Climate Initiative. We'd have a regional system like they have in the Northeast, but it's really an open question right now how many states we're going to be able to drag
Craig,
along
I mean, don't we see that once California does something, the rest of the country eventually goes along with that, just because we're such a powerhouse in population and economy?
See if this is going to work.
Exactly.
They're watching closely,
sitting on the sidelines for now. Even some of the states, most of the states, quite frankly, which had committed to this WCI partnership in cap and trade, are now pulling back a little bit and have a wait-and-see mode.
Well, Rachel knows about this pulling back a little bit when we talk about the America's Cup. It's been push-pull. So now we're at the America's Cup. We had it before the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, and it looked like it was a done deal, but not looking so done anymore.
No, it doesn't look so done anymore. San Francisco is very eager to get the 34th America's Cup. It's the third largest sporting event after the Olympics and the World Cup soccer tournament. I mean, who knew it, right? People want to watch the boats sailing back and forth on their shoreline. But it is, and people are very eager to get it. Who's behind this whole thing? Larry Ellison, the billionaire, people like to say the billionaire CEO of Oracle. He has his yacht in the race. And he gets to choose, pretty much, with the Golden Gate Yacht Club in San Francisco, where the next race will be. It's because they won the last race in Spain. So they have been wheeling and dealing with San Francisco. What will you give us, San Francisco, if we come and hold this race here? The Board of Supervisors unanimously voted, surprising, they don't do that much, on this development rights deal with Oracle or with the BMW Oracle racing team and the Golden Gate Yacht Club. And then the folks who are going to make the decision, they kind of snuck on a plane. I don't think they sailed there, and they went to Newport, Rhode Island, and said, well, what can you give us after this? Originally, they were expecting to have the decision of where the race would be held. It's in 2013 by Friday. Now they're saying it's not going to happen Friday, but we'll probably give you an answer by the end of the year. So it's coming up pretty quickly of when they might do it. It might be a little sooner than December 31st, but that's the deadline they're looking at now.
And Rachel, as everyone falls over themselves to try to get this thing, is there any way to really know how credible these numbers are in terms of like what it's worth to the area? I
mean, it's hard to say. We have had a lot of studies in San Francisco. The City Controller's Office, Economic Workforce Development Office, as well as the Board of Supervisors, budget analysts, had lots of pencils and rulers out and compasses and everything else to figure out how this is going to be. They said for the region, not just San Francisco, this race could bring in $1.2 billion into the local economy, create up to 9,000 jobs. Well, how does that happen? Yeah. The race is not that long, a couple of months long of the races. It's not one race. But people come here beforehand to kind of get ready. So they're looking at maybe up to 10 sailing teams. They've got a lot of employees coming there. And then all the residual things, they're looking at big advertising rights. We have to look at what this might mean for San Francisco if indeed it comes here. Part of the deal is that the racing team, the sponsors, would get development rights to some San Francisco piers. In return, they put money into these piers that are falling down. And San Francisco badly needs it. We've talked about not having money. They certainly don't have money to build up these decaying piers.
But it almost seems like that maybe San Francisco, or he didn't think the deal was sweet enough here, but maybe that we were just a pawn in a game to get Newport to pony up a little bit.
And that's maybe why we call him the billionaire CEO. He's a pretty smart businessman. Now, San Francisco had an original deal that was kind of formulated by the mayor's office that they put forth. Board of Supervisors, as well as the numbers cruncher, said, wait a minute, this really might cost the city a lot of money, and the city doesn't have a lot of money. So they reformulated. Instead of having some of the piers and where the race would be and the development rights in the central waterfront, kind of near the Giants ballpark, the ferry building, they went to the north part of the bay. You might say, well, that's a really cool place to be. You get the Golden Gate Bridge, you might have Alcatraz in the thing. How wonderful to have your race with that setting. This is also a race, if you go to the San Francisco Bay, where people can actually watch it from the shoreline, where it's been held in the past. You can't really see it from the shoreline. You have to go on boats, or you have to go on helicopters, or you have the TV stations televising it. So this is going to be a whole different kind of scenario here.
How did a outgoing mayor manage this to get the Board of Supervisors to agree?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, because even Chris Daly, who's the San Francisco supervisor, represents part of the Mission and the Tenderloin and the south of Market area. Chris Daly was very set against it at first, and in the end, he even said it's a good deal. Ross Mercury, now a Democrat, former Green Party member, he loves sailing. He came aboard. He got really the boards left to come forward with it, saying, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the job development, if you look at the potential to showcase San Francisco, it's really hard to turn your back on it. There was a lot of arm twisting. There was a lot of closed door meetings. There was a lot of really public kind of chest beatings saying, you've got to do this for the city. This is the time for San Francisco to come together in a unified voice. And now we just have to wait to see what Mr. Ellison wants to do.
I'm hanging on to that word, come together. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us here tonight. As we approach the holidays, many of us look forward to sharing wonderful family meals and good wines. This season, 2 of the few wineries that are owned by people of color in the Napa-Sonoma Valley will celebrate a partnership. We start with the story of one family who got their start by planting and picking the grapes in the fields. The Robledo family has deep roots in the wine country.
You ask a lot of the old-timers in wine country, and they will tell you the master grafters were the Robledos.
My grandfather came here in 1941, and my father came here in 1951. And they come in Los Braceros program.
The infamous Bracero Guest Workers Program started in World War II and continued until 1964. Mexicans were brought into the U.S. to work long hours in the fields of California for low wages and under deplorable conditions. They were sent home when the work was done.
I come here in 1968, and I come with my father, and I am 16 years old when I come here. I am the oldest for 13, 8 brothers and 5 sisters. And that's the reason I come in here and work hard for supporting them. I always work the 15 to 16 hours per day, every day, every day. When I send in the money to Mexico, I give to my father whatever I make in the week, and I keep in only whatever I make on Sundays.
Rinaldo Robledo's determination and hard work paid off. He started his own winery with just 13 acres of land, and today his grapevines cover 350 acres. The Robledo family winery is the largest Latino-owned winery in the nation. Rinaldo and his wife Maria and their 9 children are all involved in the wine business.
We've always been around vineyards. We learned how to plant the vine, how to prune, how to sucker, how to pick, how to do all the work that we do out in the vine. We learned at a young age.
As a little girl, I remember my mom also worked, so we would be right there with my mom when she was working in the vineyards.
Vanessa is the only one of the 9 children to leave the family's business. In 2008, she became a major partner in Black Coyote Wines, one of a handful of African-American-owned wineries in the country. Dr. Ernie Bates is the founder and part owner of Black Coyote.
It was a stroke of genius on my part getting Vanessa Robledo to work with us. Vanessa, during harvest time, spends a lot of time in the vineyard. She picks the winemakers, she picks the barrels, she does all of that.
This year, the two wineries began working together during the harvest and crush.
Well, the exciting thing, and I like to call this the new black and brown collaboration, it's minorities helping minorities, and we need more of that. There are 6,000 wineries in the United States. There are only 25, not 25%, but only 25 wineries that are owned by people of color.
The Robledo family's award-winning wines are recognized internationally, but Ronaldo never forgets where he came from. His Bracero wine is dedicated to the people of Mexico. It was served at the White House when Ronaldo was an honored guest of President Barack Obama and Mexican President Felipe Calderon.
Bracero means strong arms. The Mexican people come in here and work very hard.
Por ellos tenemos lo que tenemos y por ellos comemos y por ellos se ha levantado también este país.
She says that because of them, they should definitely receive more recognition for what they've done. And she says that because of them, we eat, and because of them, we are where we are. And she says they've also been the backbone of this country. Mexicans are going to begin to own more wineries and begin to own more vineyard land and to be able to harvest their own crop versus harvesting for somebody else.
Well, we thank our winery families for bringing a bit of joy into this holiday season. And we thank you for watching. Visit us anytime at kqed.org/thisweek to see episodes and segments. Subscribe to our newsletter and our podcasts, and share your thoughts about the show and our stories. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.